Hello, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed that little break in between. Well, we'll get started with our session number 5, our almost end of the day. So this next session is called Fostering LGBTQ plus inclusivity in the workplace using identity safety cues. So this session is brought to you by Adeline Emter. Adeline is a PhD student in experimental psychology at the University of North Dakota. They have a Master of Science in Psychology and graduate certificates in qualitative inquiry methods and quantitative research methods. Adeline's research interests lie in perceptions and experiences of gender and gender roles, as well as views of self and others, particularly in applied settings such as STEAM education and in the workspace. They serve on the board of directors of North Dakota Girls State and has represented marginalized students while testifying before the North Dakota State Legislature as a member of the North Dakota Student Association. Adeline also works with the North Dakota Ballet Company, prioritizing gender inclusivity and representation in the classical arts. So everyone can welcome in Adeline. Welcome in, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day. I know Adeline's here, so she'll probably join shortly.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. I could not find my button to enter the webinar. Great start.
It happens, no worries. But yeah, I
Um,
will leave this up to you, and I hope you have a
Perfect.
great presentation. I will be backstage for a bit.
Awesome. Thank you, Samantha. So, like Samantha said, my name is Adeline. I use they or she pronouns. I am a PhD candidate at the University of North Dakota, and I am involved with a variety of other community-oriented organizations. But today I'm here talking about fostering identity safety cues, or using identity safety cues to foster LGBTQ plus inclusivity in the workplace. So, we are going to just kind of dive right in. Feel free to use the Q&A section, and I'll try and keep an eye on it if you have questions throughout. So, kind of my goal for this presentation is to help all of you understand research on identity safety cues, or ISCs, look at things like employee feedback and organizational experiences with identity safety cues as well. We're going to identify some actionable identity safety cues that you can really implement through your organization, both as an individual and for those of you who are organizational leaders. And then finally, I really just want you all to learn how to foster safe, inclusive, and accessible environments for LGBTQ plus employees and consumers. So there's kind of 3 levels that we'll be talking about things on today. We'll look at the consumer level, the employee level, and then the larger organizational level. So you'll see that throughout. So as a note here, this presentation's content, is really primarily based on research in the field of organizational and educational psychology, but it's also somewhat based on a qualitative cognitive interview project that I have worked on, which was funded through UND Connect at my university. In that interview project, we interviewed both queer members of our local community here in Grand Forks, North Dakota, as well as business owners to identify what queer people, queer consumers, and queer employees feel is needed to make them feel safe and included in an environment, as well as these business owners to see what they are already implementing versus what's stopping them from implementing more identity safety cues. So, we're going to begin by just understanding LGBTQ plus inclusivity and how safety cues can do that, talking about what safety cues are. So first, in order to understand why we use these identity safety cues, we have to look at why belonging in the workplace matters. First, belonging improves performance. So when people feel like they belong in a workplace, in a store, a business, it's going to increase their confidence, their motivation, their task focus. All of those things are going to increase, as well as their overall task efficacy in the workplace. Belonging also supports their day-to-day engagement, as well as stronger connections to their work, the work that they're doing. feeling like they are safe and able to be themselves in that environment allows people to thrive. So, inclusive workplaces are ones, in my definition here, that provide physical, emotional, and psychological safety. So, all those things need to be guaranteed in order for the workplace to be truly safe and inclusive. And having this non-judgmental culture where anyone is safe to be themselves and express their identities really makes that process of both learning new things and potentially unlearning things like biases, which might impact our safety and belonging in the culture of our workplace. It makes it feel more possible. And finally, inclusion is something that builds trust. So LGBTQ plus employees and consumers are looking for respect, dignity, and a welcoming environment when they enter a space, whether that is, again, a workplace that they are working in or a business that they are attending as a consumer. So visible commitments to this reduce that fear of stigma and discrimination and builds trust between consumers and employees and the workplace itself. So, what is this word I keep saying? Identity safety cues are environmental or social signals that are communicating to marginalized groups, such as in this case LGBTQ plus individuals, that their identities are valued and the threat of discrimination is limited in that environment. So it is something that is signaling belonging to people. Clear and explicit safety cues can show LGBTQ plus people that they are respected and expected to be here, right? That they are welcome here. And they also build trust that identity-based bias is not likely, that they don't have to, they're not likely to encounter that in that environment. It also reduces daily strain for many LGBTQ plus employees, and I'll speak a little bit more on this later. It may be harder to obtain work and to maintain work when you have a queer or a trans identity. And so a lower fear of stigma is not only going to help them engage more fully, but it's going to help them feel as if they belong in that space. And people will then spend less energy hiding or concealing an identity in order to stay safe. We know that identity concealment is a minority stressor, and a lot of these identity safety cues are really things that are intended to reduce experiences of minority stress. So that unique stress that people are experiencing due to their LGBTQ plus identities, we're hoping that we can reduce them by implementing these identity safety cues. That's really the goal here. So identity safety cues can really show up in many different ways. There's a wide variety of identity safety cues. Things like social cues include respectful norms and supportive leadership behaviors. But cues can also be environmental or policy-based, and then they shape those expectations around what's allowed or valued in that work environment. So looking at why ISCs are needed, we talked about the importance of belonging, but why are ISCs the answer, and what impact could they have? So LGBTQ plus employees, as I mentioned, face risk. Many people who are LGBTQ plus, queer and trans individuals still encounter barriers to things like hiring and retention, particularly for transgender individuals. About 40% of LGBTQ plus employees hide their identity or at least choose not to disclose their identity due to stigma concerns in their workplace. This was something that came up in some of our interviews for that project I mentioned previously. We had several individuals who mentioned that the only place that they weren't out in their life, that they weren't sharing their queer or trans identity, was the workplace, because it wasn't somewhere that they felt was safe, and they didn't have these cues indicating to them that it was safe to share that identity. And again, that does then indicate that experience of minority stress. Customers, as well as employees, also are watching for these signals. So LGBTQ plus patrons are looking for these signs that a business will be safe and respectful, excuse me. So these cues are shaping perceptions of the company values, and that can also influence purchasing. This is something else that came up frequently in those interviews I mentioned. People look for those cues in the environment or in the people that they're interacting with, and they're more likely to frequent businesses that have these safety cues in place that they know is going to be safe, that they're not going to be discriminated against in that environment or that business that they are attending. And that does influence then their purchasing, right? So it's good business practice to be inclusive as well. And finally, this ISCs are needed to indicate a culture of inclusion. So employees are going to feel more comfortable expressing their true selves at work. And it's also going to enhance the likelihood of LGBTQ plus employees disclosing their identity, as I mentioned, which then will boost their engagement in the organization and lower the turnover. So a couple more benefits across groups, again, breaking it down across those three levels. For employees, if we have clear safety cues, that can reduce the need to hide their identity at work. It can also influence their belonging, support confidence, comfort, as well as job satisfaction. For customers, consumers, these visible inclusion signals or environmental inclusion signals really help these queer and trans patrons to assess their safety quickly. One thing that we were asking all of our people in the interviews I was speaking on was both their frequency in experiencing these things, but also whether they're likely to go back. So if they are experiencing these safety cues, they're going to go back to that business, they're going to trust that business, and they're going to be willing to engage with that business. It helps them assess where they are safe and when they are safe. And one of the largest themes that we identified across all of those interviews was a feeling of uncertainty. And that feeling of uncertainty, again, contributed to those experiences of minority stress and just not knowing if they were safe in that environment. So it's really important that organizations at the organizational level make an effort to show that they are supportive and inclusive of LGBTQ plus employees and consumers. So a stronger inclusion culture is going to improve retention and day-to-day engagement, but also this sense of psychological safety, both amongst your employees particularly, but amongst consumers as well, helps these teams to collaborate and innovate more effectively and will increase the likelihood that LGBTQ plus individuals will be patrons of your business. So looking at implementing and supporting inclusion here. There are three different types of identity safety cues, and this is something that has been identified throughout a wide range of psychological research. So the first that we're looking at, this was identified, all three of these were identified through a systematic review and clarifying which were the three most commonly occurring themes, essentially. So we were looking at first minority representation. So this is showing LGBTQ plus people in leadership teams and in everyday workplace stories, but also recognizing LGBTQ plus contributions to the company materials, in the company materials, both past and present. So this could be something as simple as having a queer person in an ad on Instagram, right? This can be something like, oh, you're doing some employee highlights, and you have people share their pronouns as a part of that, and you're highlighting that you have queer people working for your organization. Because again, one of those reoccurring themes that we identified was a environment feels safer when other queer people are there, or when other queer people are employees. So having queer and trans people represented in that environment, whether it be as employees or as within those representations that you are sharing, is very important. The next thing that we have is diversity policies. So diversity policies are using clear or identity affirming commitments. And we want to avoid, when we're using diversity policies, we want to avoid those vague claims. So similarly to the idea of a colorblind statement, in really emphasizing that we're all the same and we're all equal and we don't see any differences between anyone. It is more effective to use an identity safety cue that highlights that we recognize people's differences and we celebrate those. And those are going to be more effective than those more vague statements. And then making anti-discrimination policies visible. We had several participants in our research mention that they look on company websites, and if they have a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are more likely to attend that business. They're more likely to go to that place if they see that they are committed to actually engaging with diversity in an intentional way. It's also important here to note that these things need to be enforced. So if you have a policy, it can't just be written on paper. It needs to be something that's upheld throughout every aspect of your workplace. And then finally, here we have environmental cues, which might be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about like what an identity safety cue might be. So, environmental cues are things like using inclusive language, including pronouns in forms, emails, and meetings. And it's also something that we can reinforce using signage and symbols. So, like hanging a pride flag in your physical environment, having the tag on your website, things like that. So things that they're visibly seeing when they walk into a space or when they look on a digital web page that indicate to them that the organization is committed to being inclusive of LGBTQ plus identities. So we're going to take a quick poll here. I will share it. So the question that I have for all of you is, what are some examples of LGBTQ plus identity safety cues that your organization has in place? So I'll give you a couple seconds here to fill out anything that comes to mind as you're thinking of this. Could also be something that you're thinking or considering implementing as well. I'll address Joseph's question here while we're waiting for those poll answers to come in. So, Joseph asked, I'm not sure if you heard the recent episode of Code Switch NPR on DEI. I have not, but I might have to go listen to it after this. But they say that a lot of businesses are just queer washing or incorrectly implementing items. And how do we counter those problems? And that is absolutely a great question. And I will address it a little bit more in depth, a little bit farther into my presentation here, but just briefly now. The biggest thing is that these cues need to be backed up by action. This is also something that came up in a reoccurring way in all of the interviews that we conducted, in that they need to know that it's not just performative allyship. They need to know that these cues aren't just being plastered on a website to try and get them to buy things from that organization or that business. And so when it comes to practices that show that, particularly things like staff trainings that really address DEI initiatives and policies in a way that is not just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, and not following up with it. But instead, it is something that is incorporating an extra level of accountability for their staff. Um, Further than that, so we just conducted a project in the Scale Lab, which I'm a part of at UND, that was looking at identity safety cues in the classroom. And we were looking at diversity policies in syllabus language. This wasn't necessarily in the workplace, but it's a similar idea in that we're including a diversity policy. And we found that we used like an identity affirming condition, kind of like I mentioned earlier. So, identity affirming in that it's recognizing that we are all different and that people of all backgrounds, explicitly stating those types of backgrounds, are welcome in this environment, versus a colorblind diversity statement where just very vague, all are welcome, and no explicit backing up of that statement. That was much less effective than the identity affirming condition. So we need to be explicit, we need to make those things visible, and we need to be authentic and follow up with follow up our statements with action, which I will elaborate on in a moment here. So I'm going to end the poll here. We had a couple responses. Um, I will share the results if it's going to let me view them. One respondent said, having clear language about centering the trans community. Absolutely, that's very important. Having recognizable rainbow flags in the logo. Absolutely, awesome. And then someone said that their organization doesn't currently implement any. Hopefully, I can kind of give you some ideas to take back to your organization in this presentation. So continuing on here. There we go. How do we make representation real? So looking at minority representation as a safety cue. First, we can center real people with consent, of course. So, sharing LGBTQ plus staff wins and stories, as long as you obtain clear voluntary consent, but also recognizing contributions across roles, not only moments during Pride Month, right? That was also something we heard frequently in our interviews that some organizations, they're only supportive of queer and trans people during Pride Month, and as soon as June ends, that gets taken down. It's no longer on the website. And so that's an indicator to them that it is a performative piece of allyship, and it's not necessarily something that the organization is committed to year round. Um, Second, we want to build LGBTQ plus perspectives in. So this means including LGBTQ plus viewpoints in training, hiring, and any outward-facing messaging. So at each of those stages, we want to ensure that we are being inclusive of LGBTQ plus individuals and centering their voices. And then we also want to use materials that reflect LGBTQ plus experiences without tokenizing them. So we don't want the way that we highlight these people to be only highlighting them because they're a queer person and we want to post that online, right? That would also be a form of performative allyship, which is not something that would function as an effective identity safety cue. But instead, we should be centering the voices and the unique experiences of this population. And it's something that I think we can apply to a wide range of other things as well. But yeah, and then third, we want to avoid stereotypes and normalize queer identities, right? Try to acknowledge your own biases, skip the stereotypes and assumptions about how a queer person should look, right? I present in a way that is relatively cis presenting, and I am in a relationship that is relatively heterosexual presenting. But I am a queer person, both a minority and a sexual, excuse me, a gender and a sexual minority. And so the assumption that I can't be a queer person because of the way I look or a certain way is something that we should avoid as well. And we want to treat LGBTQ plus individuals as a normal and everyday part of workplace culture, right? Queer and trans people are just employees too. They're consumers. They're just people, right? And we should treat it that way. Another thing that came up very often in our interviews was that when entering a business, an immediate threat cue, so the opposite of a safety cue, was when people would stare, either consumers or employees. And so part of this here in normalizing queerness and transness in the way that we interact with people in our workplace also includes holding your patrons or consumers or anyone who's coming into your environment accountable. So having those policies in place, acting on them, and then ensuring that we're also encouraging the people who we're allowing to be in our business, in our environment, to act in that way. Shifting here to talk about those diversity policies, we want to turn promises into actual practices. So first, we can use things like identity affirming commitments. We want to replace things that are short or generic with clear LGBTQ plus statements of inclusion and respect. Be very explicit in the statements that you're using. I think it's often sometimes we don't want to do something wrong, and so we'll choose the most like vague or like I don't know, least risky way to do something or to say something. That's not something that's going to be an effective identity safety cue. We do need clear and explicit statements. And then we want to, in those statements, name the behaviors that you are expecting of your employees, of your patrons, and how you will address harm should it occur. So they're the two most important things to have in that diversity policy, both what you expect versus what would not be acceptable in that workplace, as well as what you'll do if that policy is violated. And then hold yourselves accountable, your organization accountable, those types of things. Um, we also want to make our policies both visible and real. So these anti-discrimination policies should be visible where both staff and ideally customers can also access them. We had a lot of individuals in our study that said they often just couldn't find information on whether a space was inclusive or accepting online or before they went in. And so then it just becomes, well, I'm not sure. So sometimes they'll avoid it and sometimes they'll go in and just hope for the best. But they all felt, many of our participants felt that They were more confident entering a space, engaging with a business if there was a clear policy online. So again, that could just be something like you're tagging yourself as LGBTQ plus friendly on Google, and then they're going to go in there and they have something that they can point to and say, well, you shouldn't be tagging yourself like this, right? Because you're advertising yourselves in this way if you're not going to back up that statement with action. And then again, enforce it consistently so people can trust that commitment is actually credible, that they know that you're going to, again, back up that policy with action. Can't let anything slide from patrons, from employees, anyone who's involved with your business if you want the space to be safe and inclusive of queer identities. And then finally, like I mentioned, we want to avoid performative allyship. So don't signal the support if your daily practices are going to contradict it. Make sure you're following through with things like accountability, training, and quick response to harm. So the actual primary goal of the interview project that we conducted was to try to identify training practices or materials to give to businesses. And so that's kind of the next step that we're aiming to move towards is to actually providing that type of training in businesses in my local community. But there are national level organizations that offer inclusivity trainings as well that are really great options. So anything that provides accountability training and quickly responds to hold others accountable to the policies that you have in place. And then finally, those visible inclusion cues, the environmental cues. First here we have that inclusive language. So make sure all of your forms, your templates, your meeting scripts avoid gendered defaults. So if you are sending out forms to individuals and you don't have you don't currently have an option to select something other than male or female, that's something that should be updated, right? And just having another option, or even to just like respond as an open-ended question, is going to make it more inclusive for trans people who maybe aren't comfortable checking male or female. And then we want to model respectful wording in things like emails, chats, and especially any public-facing materials. Ensure that all of that is using inclusive language, not necessarily like automatically gendered, things like that. We also want to normalize pronouns. Having pronouns on staff tags was like one of the top things that came up in those interviews as something that immediately indicates to that person that they are welcome in that space, or emails in or pronouns in email signatures as well, because it's something that they're visibly seeing that they can immediately go, okay, like I can trust that this person is going to respect my pronouns if they are sharing their pronouns with me. So this can even be an opt-in status. You don't have to require everyone to share their pronouns. I know that sometimes deciding on what pronouns you currently want to be using is not always consistent, and that's totally fine. But it should be an option that's provided to your staff. That is inclusive of both queer employees, and it is something that is going to signal to queer customers that they are safe. And then again, anytime you introduce yourself, like I started this off, and I'm sure many of us did during this presentation about sharing our pronouns, right? So when you introduce yourself to someone, if you introduce yourself with your pronouns, that is going to be an indicator to that person that it would be safe to share if they so choose. But we don't want to pressure disclosure if that's not something they're comfortable with. And then finally here, we want to show visible support. So we want to post clear signs, stickers, or symbols that really signal LGBTQ plus people are welcome in that environment. It's also helpful if you can share a simple list of internal and maybe local LGBTQ plus resources that are accessible to your employees, regardless of if there are out LGBTQ plus people in your organization. This is something that is always good to share and ensure people have access to information about those resources. So a couple takeaways from like the research projects in particular that I'm kind of building this work off of. So first, representation increases belonging. So a variety of studies have shown that LGBTQ plus people report the highest belonging when they feel that they are represented in that environment. And this is true of other minoritized identities as well. People who are marginalized are going to feel like they belong more when they're represented in the materials, in the workplace, in whatever they're engaging with. And then affirming promises will amplify impact. Pairing that representation with an identity affirming commitment is going to improve interest and inclusivity perceptions. So, I want to stress that the three categories I've discussed today aren't things that have to be used in isolation of one another. In fact, I would highly encourage you to implement a combination of several. Although I will mention in at least some educational psychology research, minority representation does tend to be a more effective tool in increasing belonging than some of these other things on their own. But pairing multiple together, again, is a really great way to do that. And one more note on that. The minority representation is something that seems to signal to people that the organization or the business is more authentically committed. If they're making an effort to include minorities and represent minorities in their content, their materials, whatever they're creating. Whereas those environmental cues and diversity policies are sometimes viewed as a little bit more performative than minority representation. Um, we want to avoid some generic messaging, as I had mentioned previously. So if we use those identity neutral kind of statements, they don't really add a whole lot without using very clear and specific affirmations of what we're going to do, what we believe, those types of things. And then a key lesson here for workplaces is really just that those environmental cues are going to work best when they're reinforced by meaningful, credible policies and representation. So we're going to shift here a little bit. I'm going to take a second to answer some questions, and then we're going to look at our actual action steps here. Kelsey asks, legally, the institution I work for is not allowed to support or allow DEI language. Do you have any suggestions on how an individual can subtly signal that they are a safe space? Yes, Kelsey, absolutely. This is something that comes up often, and it does somewhat limit what we can do, right? So the first thing that I would recommend is placing yourself as a welcoming person, or some institutions and organizations have shifted to using those identity neutral statements, and it's more of like a everyone is welcome here. And I will just note, while that is less effective, it's still more effective than nothing. So there are things that you can still do if you're able to when you have conversations, not necessarily when you're writing any formal documentation or anything like that. Introducing yourself with your pronouns is a really great first step because it's something that is just in this conversation with you and this one other person, and it signals that sense of safety to them. Um, but that DEI language is definitely more challenging to indicate. Some of the things that our interview participants indicated as environmental cues were not always necessarily like a pride flag, right? Like something that's super visible and like attached to a DEI type ideology. I don't know if that's the right term here, but DEI initiatives, I suppose. Because some of the things that they indicated were environmental safety cues were just queer people existing in that space, right? So welcoming, being inclusive of those queer people. But one thing that they mentioned was that sometimes it was a safety cue just to see a lack of something else. And so if your institution is one that is actively pushing against this like DEI language, it might make a difference to just even actively choose to disclude some of that content from your personal space. So they mentioned a lot of things like some of the more conservative indicators, like a Blue Lives Matter flag was a big one, a Confederate flag was a big one, and that's a place where like these cues are transferring across, right? So even if you're not able to hang a pride flag in your office, being very conscious about the environment that you are cultivating in a way that could still signal to them that it is a safe space, even though you aren't able to do those explicit things. So I hope some of that helped. And I'm happy to talk. I'll be at our expo booth later this afternoon if you want to chat more. And then Donna asked, Because of the current administration, many of our member organizations had to choose to change their name and or logo of their organization to remove the natural safety cues that have acted as a green light all along. They ask, please share your thoughts or findings on how existing and new organizations and services can stay successful at this time. I think a lot of this is similar to my response to Kelsey's question, and that there are still things that we can do even if they aren't hanging a super visible pride flag, right? Um, we also had participants who said that just not being stared at and being treated like a person with respect, and being welcomed and feel like they can be just a normal person in a business was really important to them because that's all they're trying to do, right? The interviews we were conducting were really just surrounding how do you have access to being a consumer in a relatively conservative state here in North Dakota. Um, and so, yeah, I think a lot of what I said for Kelsey's question applies here as well. But just make an active effort in any way you can. And that's, in some ways, all we can do, unfortunately. Okay, so we're going to shift into some of these action steps, and hopefully some of these will spark some of those ideas for both of you here. So we're looking at leaders here, and we're going to actually start this with a poll as well. Um, I'll give you a couple minutes to complete this poll. So we're asking here, if you are an organizational leader in attendance here, what is one challenge that you faced in creating an inclusive workplace? And then for employees, if you are a queer employee, what is one barrier that you faced relating to inclusion in the workplace? These don't have to necessarily be about at the place that you are currently working. And you could also, in that employee section, you could list something as being a patron as well, in attending a business, even if it's not the one that you're currently employed at or engaging with. So I'll give you a few minutes here. So we're waiting for these to fill in too. I'll just mention briefly too, that, like I said, these identity safety cues, a lot of the things that I am sharing are they seem like they might be big things, right? And I'll talk about this in just a moment. And I think this will help when your organization has some more of those restrictions. Um, but we can start small, right? Even small change is going to work gradually towards our larger goal. And so I just encourage you to, even if it feels like it's maybe too big, or there's too much, that these are going to be challenging to implement. I just want to encourage you to start small because something is better than nothing. So give it another minute or so here. So I'm just going to close up the poll here and then I'll kind of review our responses. Okay, so starting with the organizational leader responses. So again, that question is just what's one challenge that you faced in creating an inclusive workplace? This person said working at a volunteer organization. It says member in high social standing is very skilled at being disrespectful in a way that allows them to claim ignorance. Example, purposely using wrong pronouns. That is a challenge, absolutely. And I do think that is something where that accountability piece does come in, but it is challenging, right? If this person is like your boss, that's something that you're probably not comfortable doing. And so it might involve asking someone else to get involved in that situation. But it is something where accountability is required because claiming ignorance really isn't an excuse when we have things like these trainings that are available. Um, And then another person said balancing guardianship or protection with gatekeeping. And absolutely, I think that's true. We have to find the balance between those. And then for employees, a barrier that you faced related to inclusion. One person said, surprisingly, working for a state agency in Washington has been pretty inclusive, though it's not the same for all agencies. And then DEI training has helped, but it's not universal. And I absolutely agree. The DEI training only does so much, does as much as people are willing to engage with it, right? And that accountability is a very important piece. Someone else said getting the higher ups to agree is a challenge to inclusion in the workplace, and that's absolutely true too. It has to be, this is something that has to start from an institutional level in many cases, and so that's something we'll discuss here shortly too. Um, Someone said laws about LGBTQ plus inclusion in Texas schools, and absolutely, that's another huge challenge. And there's also another one here that says the current administration in the Oval Office and its anti-DEI policies. And yeah, absolutely, all of these things are great points. It is very challenging to implement these if the people who have power, who have status, who have the ability to change them aren't willing to do so. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment here. So again, looking at challenges to ISCs. First, a common one that comes up is competing priorities. So some institutional leaders see inclusion as valuable, but many of them see these changes as burdens or as too much work, too much effort. And that's something that we came up in some of those business interviews, that it's too much, and they don't want to do it. Um, and then pushback from these businesses also often focuses on the amount of time, the cost, or the perceived inconvenience that it might have to them. So that is a challenge that we often see. Um, Substance over symbols is also a challenge, right? So these visible cues must match the lived experiences, the policies, and the daily actions and behaviors that are being taken in order to be effective. And that performative allyship weakens trust and it can increase skepticism both from employees and from customers. And then I think this is one of the biggest ones that came up in conversation was the risk of backlash. A lot of business owners were very concerned that including these types of things in their business, implementing identity safety cues for queer and trans people, would have negative backlash from other people. Um, my recommendation in that sense, at least, is to ensure that you plan responses and equip your staff with the skills to address that type of backlash, so safety cues do not or not expose LGBTQ plus people to potential harm. So we do have to be very careful and intentional when implementing these things. So, a couple practical first steps, and these are things that I would encourage all of you who are looking for things to implement, even on a very small scale, to start with. So, first, label your business as LGBTQ plus friendly online. So, consider things like certification through the National LGBTQ plus Chamber of Commerce, as well as other local resources. Many communities have a local page of different locations that are LGBTQ plus friendly as well. So look for things like Facebook groups to advertise in. Look for just ways to connect and make an intentional signaling of inclusivity to the public. Um, Second, build inclusive everyday skills. So staff need to be trained to notice and interrupt bias and microaggressions. And if you are someone who doesn't have the ability to change some of these more organizational or institutional level issues, this is where you can start. Ensure that you are addressing your own biases and that you are making an effort to address bias and microaggressions in the workplace. Because even just having that one other person to support a queer or trans person in the workplace does make a difference in increasing the likelihood that they're going to feel supported and like they belong. And then practice respectful responses when customers or coworkers cause harm. I do think that there's a level of this too that's just good business practice too, right? If you have people that you're working with, you want them to be able to be respectful even if they disagree with a person, right? We need to be able to interact with others in a way that shows that we value them. Um, and so this is something, even again, if your institution isn't willing to implement a explicit DEI policy or a diversity policy in some way, staff training to just ensure that we're being respectful and staff aren't staring at queer and trans customers is a very simple and very base level thing that we can implement. And then finally, connecting with community. This was something that in my local community came up very frequently as well. That there just weren't a whole lot of places that felt safe to gather as a queer community. There are really only like two or three locations here in my hometown of Grand Forks, North Dakota, that are actively hosting Pride events or actively engaging with Pride groups. So if it is something that you have the ability to do, try to sponsor or table at Pride events or other local LGBTQ plus events. And then if you have a physical space, try to offer that space to queer groups to gather when it's feasible. Right, there are a lot of digital and online resources, and those are great. Those are important things, but particularly for people in smaller communities, having even just one space to gather will also make that space, both the business and the community, the people, feel like they belong there. Accountability and action. How do we actually do these things and make it matter? How do we do these things and not do it performatively? Again, make inclusion a practice. It is not just a statement. It is not just a flag hanging on the wall. We need to build regular reflection into the routines. It shouldn't be a one-time initiative where we post something on Instagram and then we move on from it and never touch it again. It should be something that is reflected on regularly, something that is reviewed in some way, shape, or form. Also, make sure you're updating cues and practices as your staff needs and as language evolves, right? There is often, I'm thinking back to those like forms and things I mentioned earlier. If you are taking information about clients and you have something where you ask about gender, make an open-ended option, right? Even if you start listing like man, woman, non-binary, right? That still might be exclusive of some identities. And so if you have the option to self-describe, that's often much more inclusive and more effective. Um, we want to model and respond quickly as well. So leaders need to model respectful language and these everyday inclusive norms. But we also need to make sure that we are addressing the bias and harm promptly, consistently, and without defensiveness. Right? We need to hold people accountable, and we need to not try to justify the actions that were taken. Um, and again, I'm encouraging you here to start small and then scale, right? We can start with one small thing today, and then choose one credible change that will build your trust with the queer community in your workplace or in your community, and try to deliver that this month. So this could even just be something the next time you meet someone in your workplace who is it's new, maybe a new hire, maybe a new client, use your pronouns. Introduce yourself with your pronouns. It's a simple thing that you can implement. And then we want to sustain that momentum by reinforcing the actions with that visible follow through, right? So again, don't just post the diversity philosophy online. You actually have to follow it through with that training, that maintenance. So yeah, kind of brings me to the end. I think I've got a couple more questions here that I'll start to address. And if you actually, I think I might have gotten them all. They're just still marked as open. So if you have some more questions, feel free to type them in that Q&A session. I'll hang out here for a couple more minutes. And then the rest of this afternoon, I will be in that expo session as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Adeline. You were amazing with the questions too going ahead, so I will leave room for if people have more questions to come in. But thank you so much already. Like this was incredibly informative and useful for like um, day-to-day work stuff as well. Just not like it both in life and also for your day-to-day work. So thank you
Absolutely.
so much. Really good and useful info.
Yes.
Amazing.
And Joseph, I'm going to check out that episode, the podcast episode you mentioned.
Yes. If y'all haven't seen it, just put the link in chat. If y'all want to check out that episode, I think he said it was NPR. So, well, oh, we have another. Yes, thank you for putting it again. I appreciate that. So, well, thank you so much. If you
Yeah,
have,
I'll be in my expo booth if anyone has questions or wants to chat.
oh, and there's another one on allyship. Right.
Awesome.
No, thank you, Adeline, so much for being here and for sharing this. We appreciate all the time it took to you for making the presentations and also coming and sharing. As Adeline mentioned, they're going to be also in our expo area with the Scale Lab. So if you want to talk more directly to Adeline or about the Scale Lab and the research that they're doing, please go ahead and pop over there until 6 p.m. Aside from that, we will also move into the next session. So also remember, you'll get a short survey at the end of the session. 4 questions long. I highly appreciate it if you all can complete that. And yeah, we'll go on at the next session. We'll start at 4 o'clock. And this is going to be digital organizing for intersectional queer communities with Alyssa Asal. So we'll be starting that at 4 o'clock. And aside from that, I appreciate everyone here and for sticking around with us during this whole summit. So thank you.
Thank you all.